Luke here, welcome to Ad Spend Secrets. In today's episode, we're going to go over metrics that matter. Some of the top metrics that you should be keeping an eye on in your business to explore growth opportunities and get a good understanding of where your business stands if you're investing in paid advertising. Let's get into it. So in today's episode, we're going to talk through a few client scenarios where we've had discussions and we've come to the conclusion that some of these goals might be conflicting with each other. And it does come back to the metrics that we'll talk about. I'm going to dive into some of the metrics that we actually track in our agency. I've got a number of metrics here that we can run through, and these will give you a good feel for where the business is at, if you can invest more in advertising. And of course, you can take these metrics one step further, factoring in more margins and growth metrics and things like that. But we'll keep it relatively simple, and I'll just run through exactly what we look at and what we build into reports for clients so that it's clear. So first of all, identifying the metrics that matter, the ones that are going to tie back to business goals, which at the end of the day is revenue, typically return on ad spend. What are you putting in ads and what's coming out in revenue? So the big one there is marketing efficiency as a topic, I suppose, but there's a number of metrics that will give you an idea as to how efficient the marketing is for your e-commerce brand. And one of those is the MER ratio. So it's exactly looking at that. It's looking at the amount of ad spend, say over a monthly period, that you put into platforms, and you would just add up your Google spend, your Meta spend, and it's looking at the revenue coming out at the store level. So in this example, we're ignoring platform-specific metrics for many reasons, but the main one being that they're not as reliable these days. There can be attribution or claimed purchases for the same sale across both Meta and Google. But we find it's just a little bit clearer to look at store-level holistic metrics. So how much have you spent on ads and what revenue has come back? So you would look at the marketing efficiency ratio as a percentage typically. So if it was a 10% ratio, it means that you've spent $10 on ads and you've had $100 in revenue come back in its simplest form. The inverse of that is what we would call the blended ROAS. So it's your return on ad spend, which you're probably quite familiar with as an e-commerce brand owner. And you get these metrics in platform, Google and Facebook, and you can look at those independently. But what we like to do is look at the revenue that's come out and the advertising spend that's gone in. So using the same metrics, but it's kind of the opposite. So you would you would look at the store revenue, and then you would divide that by the actual spend going in, and it's going to give you a number. It's going to be like 5.5 or 6.6. That's your blended revenue. One thing to note, and one thing that we keep an eye on for clients is in Shopify, you'll often have different channels, different sources of revenue. So we typically would look at online store revenue specifically, just because that's probably the most likely influenced by the online spend. If you're doing a lot digitally, and then we're looking at online sales, we have clients that might do baby expos and things like that, where they might have point of sale systems, which can muddy the waters and murky up the data a bit. So they're the store level marketing efficiency style metrics that we find helpful to track. And then in terms of the acquisition of a customer, you want to be able to track what that costs. And the best way, well, the easiest way that you can do that is you can look at your returning customer percentage in Shopify, and you can use that to calculate how many orders over that month, say, were from new customers. And you can use your ad spend then to divide your ad spend by number of new customer orders. And that will give you an indication of what it's costing to acquire a new customer. And that's important because you want to be filling the top of the funnel, right? If you're spending on ads and you're spending heavily, but you're constantly circling the bottom of the drain there and picking up those easy sales, the ones that are already warmed up from social posts, and you're not prospecting going out to new audiences, you can actually slow down over time. Your growth might stagnate. And it's especially important for brands, and we just spoke to a nappy brand actually that told us exactly this. They've got subscriptions, and their subscriptions are going really well and they're really sticky, but they're not feeding enough ad spend into new orders that will then naturally flow through into subscriptions. So feeding that top of the funnel is quite important there. Customer acquisition cost, your CAC, is what it's typically short named as, will be a great indicator of how efficiently you're bringing in new business. Outside of those metrics we've just talked about, average order value, you're probably very familiar with. It's on the dashboard in Shopify, right in your face. We want that as high as possible, ultimately. And then beyond that, we look at LTV. And typically with ecom stores, you want a relatively shortish term, long-term value, I suppose, because if you're investing in advertising and, maybe a customer might buy once and then once again 18 months later or something like that, it's hard to factor that in because you're investing in ads, you need that money back into the system now. So when we're looking at LTV, we might take a, say, 90-day time frame and say, okay, well, the average order value today is $60. We know they're going to place another order in typically 45 days away from now. We've got our email marketing circling in the background and pushing additional purchases. And so we might have a 20% increase on what that AOV is, and we'd consider that our LTV. Now, when you've got your LTV, you've got your customer acquisition cost, you can then look at what's known as the LTV over CAC. So you now have a pretty good idea of what the lifetime value of a customer is for the business. And again, we're keeping it to a relatively short window there because we want to work out how much money we can feed back into the system. We don't want to wait 18 months to realize that LTV because the cash is going to dry up potentially. You might not be able to increase ad spend. So conservative metrics here in a way. And you want to divide that LTV that you've discovered over the cost per acquisition, the CAC. And that's going to give you a number typically between, say, 1 and 6. If you're below 3, your marketing could be improved in terms of efficiency. You might have a slightly higher customer acquisition cost. You might have a low LTV. So then the game becomes, how can we lower the cost per new customer? And how can we increase that LTV and get more repeat purchases within that window of time? And there's going to be different solutions that you can lean on depending on what that number looks like for you. If you're sitting around 3 to 4, you're probably quite efficient and you're probably spending a decent amount on ads, and you could continue on. But if you're at 5 or above, it actually is indicating that you could be a bit more aggressive with your advertising spend. So maybe you're underspending on ads and you could push things further. So we typically see this number grow during sales periods like Black Friday, Cyber Monday, for example. When you just see the AOV increase, the customer acquisition cost drops, and you'll see this ratio increase. And, we actually use these kind of numbers to look historically the year prior and say, okay, well, this year when we're planning ahead, we're going to spend an extra, $50 to $100 a day on Meta and X amount extra on Google because we know it's going to become efficient and we don't want to leave it too late and try and, be turning things around day of sale. So these numbers are helpful in planning and forecasting as well. So when you've got a number LTV over CAC there of 4 or 5 and above, and you're realizing you could be spending more on ads, it probably means if that number's high, you've got a pretty high LTV or you've got a really low customer acquisition cost, or maybe a combination of the two. So there's some of the sort of store level top line metrics, only 3 to 6 of those that we track pretty consistently. And as I said, you can make these a little more detailed and factor in your gross margins and your COGS a little more to figure out, what the profit metrics might look like. And that's another step that we can go in another episode. But I hope that was helpful with those sort of key numbers. We didn't really talk about it. It's kind of factored in your customer acquisition costs a little bit, but website conversion rate obviously is the big one. You've got traffic on one side and you've got the conversion rate on another. If your traffic's really expensive, you're really going to want that conversion rate to be high so that you're not paying too much per customer. And just the same is if your traffic's really cheap, ultimately you want your conversion rate to be as high as possible, but it can be a bit lower if you're paying a lot less per visitor to your site. So they do work in tandem like that. And so these metrics can sometimes conflict. When we're talking to a client recently, this is a brand that sells newborn babywear, and the conversation became, our site traffic has dropped. I just want more site traffic, right? And then in that same conversation towards the end, there was also, talk about the return on ad spend dropping. Now, these things can be conflicting in nature because we can send more traffic to your site by, advertising the store-wide sort of products or every product that you've got. We can send more people to the site. But if you're also wanting that conversion value over cost, that return on ad spend increase, we really should be trying to send traffic through the most convertible products, the highest converting products. And they might not always be the lowest cost per click kind of products to push. Or, there are some formats on, whether it be Google or Facebook, that you might pay more per click, but it converts at a lot higher rate. And so you might see less store sessions, but a higher conversion rate. And just the same, when you think about things from the other perspective, you can increase traffic really easily on these platforms. So you can run what's called a traffic campaign on Facebook, and you will just see your site sessions increase dramatically. But what we see, and we've tested this with clients, is that the quality of that traffic is really poor. And so you might see people stay on site for 2 seconds. And when you do a conversion objective, on the other hand, they might stay on for 40 to 50 seconds on average. And so your conversion rate through the traffic campaign is going to be terrible. So site sessions alone shouldn't be the goal, because it can directly impact the return on ad spend. So always good thinking about how these metrics might impact one another. And if you're after purely site sessions, is that the goal? And how might that impact the conversion value over cost, the return on ad spend? So I hope that was helpful. We talked about a few different metrics and how they might compete with each other. If you've got any questions on this at all, or if you'd like a free audit on your numbers, if you'd like to chat through where you're at with the current agency, if you're getting any kind of communication like this, or you feel like you could be tracking better, or you really want to identify those areas for growth, just book in a call at simplyconverting.com/call. You'll see a survey with a few questions. You'll book in a call, you'll speak to me directly, and I'm happy to chat. And if there's any way I can help, I'll let you know what that might look like.